I'll now take the sediment from the Planning Committee by roll call. The following members are present: Councillors Ali Callison, Ralph Barker, Arch Buchanan, Ross Clark, Jerry Convery, Margaret Cowie, Maureen Devlin, Mary Donnelly. Do we have Councillor Fagan? Councillor Gladys Ferguson Miller?
Yeah.
Councillors Elise Frame, Alistair Fulton, Shalene Handybod, Mark Horsham, Ross Lambie are all present. We have apologies from Councillor Monique McAdams, and Councillor Bert Thompson is attending as a substitute. Councillor Leslie MacDonald is also present. Councillor David McLaughlin?
Yep.
Councillor Richard Nelson is present. We have apologies from Councillor Norman Ray, and Councillor Robert Brown is attending as a substitute. Councillors John Ross, Ali Salamati and Graham Scott are all in attendance. We have apologies from Councillor David Shearer. Councillor Helen Toner?
Here.
Here. And Councillor David Watson is also in attendance. Thank you, and I will hand you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you, Stuart. Just before we start today's business, members, I'd just like to advise that the planning application P22013, agenda item 3 in your pack, has been withdrawn by the applicant, so will not be in today's papers. I'm going to ask Stuart also just to give us an update on the change to the Council of Code of Conduct before we start today's meeting.
Thanks, Chair. I thought it might be helpful to highlight a change to the Councillors' Code of Conduct relating to the attendance of non-committee members. Some members will be aware that the previous Code of Conduct required non-committee members to leave the meeting once they had addressed the committee. However, Section 7.12 of the revised Code of Conduct states that members should only participate to the extent that their council's procedures and standing orders allow. In terms of Standing Order number 39A, where the Chair decides a member can speak on an issue of local interest, once they have addressed the committee, they are unable to take any further part in the proceedings or vote on any issue. Furthermore, where a member attends in person, they will be asked to return to the public gallery once they have addressed the committee, and if attending virtually, they will be asked to turn off their microphone and camera once they have addressed the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 1, any declarations of interest? Agenda item 2, application P212044, pages 5 to 30 in your pack, is the 38 Leyland Road, Bothwell. I'll ask Bernard to present this.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that there was a late request made for a hearing in relation to this application, and following consideration, it was refused. Planning permission in principle is sought for residential development comprising dwelling houses and flats, together with access, landscaping, open space and associated works. No detailed drawings have been submitted as part of the application, as the detailed matters of scale, appearance, layout, landscaping, etc. would be determined as part of a detailed planning application should permission in principle be granted. However, an indicative master plan has been submitted which shows a development of 44 new dwellings. A community nature reserve is proposed as an extension to an existing pond within the eastern area of the site, and the master plan indicates the formation of 2 primary access points from Leylands Road adjacent to the west of the site. The site is located directly to the east of Leylands Road and Bothwell Park Road in Bothwell. The site extends to approximately 4.6 hectares and comprises improved grassland, marshy grassland, swamp and some broad-leaved woodland. The proposed development is classified as a major development under the Town and Country Planning Scotland Regulations 2009 and was subject to a 12-week period of pre-application consultation, including an interactive website which was set up to host a public consultation event held through a live question and answer session in August 2021. In terms of the development plan status, the proposed development requires to be assessed and considered against the approved Glasgow and Clyde Valley Strategic Development Plan, which is committed to supporting new housing, which creates high quality places and delivers the right type of housing in the right locations. Particularly Policies 8, which relates to housing land requirements, and Policy 14, Greenbelt. Ultimately, the aim is to direct the right type of development to the right location. In terms of local plan policy, the site is also located within the Greenbelt, and the relevant policies listed are in 3.1.2 of the report. I'll come to those later when I go through the assessment of the development. The consultation responses are summarised in section 4 of the report, and there were no objections other than from the local community council. In terms of any matters raised, they could potentially be dealt with through appropriately worded conditions. The objections to the proposal and letters of support are summarised in section 5 of the report. There were broadly a total of just over 60 representations submitted, with almost an equal 50-50 split of those in support and those who are against the proposal. In terms of the application itself, any development has to be determined as the government guidance dictates. The determination of a planning application shall be in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In terms of the strategic planning policy, the proposal requires to be considered against the Glasgow and Clyde Valley Strategic Development Plan. And in particular, Policy 8, Housing Land Requirements, requires local authorities to make provisions within their local development plans for all 10-year housing land requirement as set out within Schedule 8, which is to allocate a range of effective residential sites to provide a minimum of 5 years effective land supply at all times, to undertake an annual housing land audit, to monitor completions, and to take steps to remedy any shortfalls that may exist with regard to this policy. The planning service is satisfied that the supply of housing meets the requirements set out by the Scottish Government and by Clyde Plan. Therefore, there is no need for the further release of land for housing at this location. The Council has assessed its housing land supply and has concluded that it is robust and generous, and that there is no requirement for housing release since there is no shortfall identified in land supply. Policy 14 of the Clyde Plan relates to Greenbelt and states that local authorities are required to designate Greenbelt in order to ensure that development is directed to the most appropriate locations and supports regeneration. Given the above assessment of the Council's housing land supply, it's considered that there is no need for the site to be released since there is no shortfall in the housing land requirement. This matter is discussed further. In terms of the local plan policy, the site is also located within the Greenbelt, and that's one of the key considerations. Whilst noting the content of the supporting information submitted with the application, the Greenbelt location is a priority consideration, and it is also out with the Bothwell settlement boundary. It's not concluded in any of the development priorities identified in Appendix 3 of the adopted Local Development Plan 2. It's considered that the proposed use of the site for residential development would not represent sustainable economic growth or regeneration in this instance. It would instead result in significant and unwarranted intrusion into the Greenbelt at this location, resulting in an adverse impact on the natural environment. There are also concerns regarding the peripheral nature of the site in terms of its distance to the town centre. Policy 4 states that the purpose of the Greenbelt is to direct development to the most appropriate locations and support regeneration, protect and enhance the character, landscape setting and identity of the settlement, and protect and provide access to open space. It's considered that the application for residential development in the site does not accord with Policy 4 Greenbelt and Rural Area of the adopted Local Development Plan, as it cannot be justified under any of the circumstances listed. It's considered that the approval of the application and the development of the site for housing would be inappropriate and would also set an undesirable precedent, leading to potential pressures for other incremental expansions further into the adjoining Greenbelt land that would be harder to resist in future. There are no material considerations that outweigh the provisions of the development plan in terms of the site's Greenbelt designation. Therefore, it's considered that a departure from the development plan in this instance cannot be justified, and the proposal is therefore considered to be contrary to the development plan, and it's recommended that the application is refused.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions? Councillor Devlin?
I think it's actually really not a question, Chair. It's to do. I'm really glad to see this report being refused because it is an inappropriate place for housing. What I don't understand is 4.4 and SEPA said it's not a flood area. I know less than 10 years ago we could not drive along Lakeland Road because of the flooding issues. So I can't understand that, but I have to say I'm really glad to see this being refused. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions for Bernard? I'll move that report.
I'll second it.
Item 4, application P190776, pages 45 to 74, Kerswell Avenue, Carnwath. Again, I'll ask Bernard to give the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. This application was previously presented to the March Planning Committee, where it was agreed to defer the application. Since there are new members in the committee who may not be as familiar with the application, I'll run through the previous presentation and also provide an update since the last meeting. Planning permission is sought for a residential development consisting of 36 house plots on land within Kerswell, which is a short distance from Carnwath. The site extends to approximately 3 hectares of relatively level ground, which is currently used as agricultural grazing land. Although the site is located in a rural area, it sits amid a number of residential properties and other land which is planning permission for residential development. The development would consist of 36 house plots. The details of any proposed housing would require to be the subject of a separate planning application. The development would take access from Kerswell Avenue with an internal spine road serving 3 short cul-de-sacs. The development would contain amenity space and appropriate drainage measures. Since the application is classed as a major application, pre-application consultation was undertaken prior to the submission of the planning application. In terms of the local plan, the site is identified as part of the housing land supply and falls within the settlement boundary of Kerswell. The principle of residential development at this location is therefore supported by the local plan. There is an extensive planning history of development over the past 20 years or so within the wider Kerswell estate, involving the erection of individual dwelling houses, the creation of small housing developments, and the conversion of Bertram House to flats. The most significant application in terms of relevance to this proposal is planning permission CL13-0488, which was approved by the Planning Committee in February 2014 for a 36 house plot development on this site. This approval preceded the designation of the site as part of the housing land supply in the local plan. In terms of consultations, no objections have been raised from consultees, subject to the use of appropriate conditions, and these comments are summarised in section 4 of the report. It's also required that if the application was approved, a Section 75 planning obligation will be required to address contributions relating to education, communities and affordable housing. Since the last committee, 1 additional representation has been received, which increases the total to 46 letters of representation. The points raised are summarised in Section 5 of the report, and the additional representation did not raise any new matters. The main issues relate to traffic, access, construction, drainage, privacy, layout, design, noise and education. A request for a hearing was also made, and following discussion between the Chair and the Planning Committee and the Head of Service, it was declined at that time. Planning permission has previously been approved for residential development at this location, and the site is identified in the adopted local plan as forming part of the housing land supply. The principle of residential development is therefore supported by the local plan. The proposed development would consolidate the established development pattern in the locality. This is aided by the existing woodland backdrop to the site, which further promotes visual integration and reduces the impact on the character of the surrounding area. In addition, views into the site from the wider area are limited. The site is accessed by an existing private road, approximately 1 kilometre in length, along which is a mixture of clusters of houses of varying age. The site can accommodate an additional residential development of the scale proposed without affecting the setting or character of these building groups. The development will not appear out of place as it can successfully merge into its background due to the presence of mature trees and building groups centred around Bertram House. The site will face onto the junction with Bertram Avenue, where there is a neighbourhood hub. The layout, orientation, amenity provision and landscaping is also satisfactory, and the main elevation of houses will front onto the adjacent roads. The design of the proposed houses does not form part of this application. However, a condition would be added to any consent granted to require a detailed planning brief to be agreed with the council. This will set the parameters on building heights, plot ratios, design details and materials. Roads and Transportation Services have not raised any road safety issues affecting the development of the site, subject to several conditions, including those covering improvements to Careswell Avenue, traffic management, a dilapidation survey, and the internal road layout of the new development. Following consideration of this application at the last Planning Committee, further consideration has been given to factoring and maintenance of the site, the access road, and whether there have been any historic issues raised or enforcement issues at this location. As a result, Condition 30 attached to this report, which relates to the maintenance and management of Careswell Avenue, has been updated in reference to title deeds removed. This creates a more robust and enforceable planning condition. Roads maintain their position and remain satisfied with the proposal and the conditions that are proposed. In addition, there are no records of historic enforcement-related issues at this location or complaints which have been raised with our enforcement team. The proposals represent an appropriate form of residential development for this site, and it is therefore recommended that detailed planning consent be granted, subject to the conditions listed. However, consent should be withheld until the conclusion of a suitable Section 75 agreement to ensure the submission of the necessary financial contributions. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Bernard. Just before I open for questions, I'm going to invite Councillor McCallum to speak as a local member to this agenda item. Just to remember, Councillor McCallum, of the 5-minute time frame for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee today. I promise I will be brief. I'll be brief because, as far as I can see from the updated report supplied to you at this meeting, there has been no progress or positive development since this item was discussed and deferred at the last meeting of the committee prior to the election. There's only clarification on some peripheral issues, but no progress or positive development on the crucial one. I absolutely need to speak up on behalf of my constituents, who since I was first elected in 2017 have constantly and consistently contacted me and my fellow ward councillors regarding SLC continuing to recommend approving planning applications for this estate. I know the concerns and complaints go back many years prior to me taking up this role. These complaints continue absolutely to this day, and I'm afraid South Lanarkshire Council's reputation amongst virtually all the residents of this estate is very poor indeed. Approval of the significant housing development application will only result in a new, unprecedented low. My constituents have no issues about housing developments, and it's absolutely not about NIMBYism. It's, as my fellow ward councillors articulated the last planning in April, about the complete inadequacy of the main infrastructure into this estate, Careswell Avenue. Careswell Avenue has been described mostly as a lengthy, single-track farm road, which has been tarred to an extent. It is a private road. It's the only route into the housing estate. Most of it is pretty dreadful state. Travelling along it takes considerable time because of this, despite many passing places. Many residents complain of damage to their vehicles, particularly tyres when travelling on it. The HGV and plant required for building many more houses will significantly add to its degradation. I have reports of school buses employed by SLC refusing to drive on the avenue. Absolutely, most importantly, residents, as I do, have real concerns about the fire service, ambulance and police accessing the estate rapidly in an emergency. In my opinion, my constituents in Careswell Avenue, as it stands, is completely adequate to accommodate the existing houses, as let alone the significant additional number proposed in this application. Crucially, as there are a series of owners along the stretch of the avenue, it is almost certainly impossible to reach an agreement to pay for the repair, development and upgrading of it. And that is unlikely to change, irrespective of the updated statements in this report. And that is the catch-22 situation with Careswell Avenue. The council refused to adopt it until it is brought to an acceptable state, but that is almost impossible to do so due to the topography and liability ownership issues are sorted. I see no prospect of these issues being resolved anytime soon. So on behalf of the many residents of Kersnell Estate who have contacted me and my fellow ward councillors, and in the interest of the reputation of South Lanarkshire Council, I ask this committee to refuse this application and any further applications until the only route into the estate is brought up to an acceptable and fundamentally safe standard. Thank you for your time today, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCallum, for your presentation to the committee this morning. Can I ask you just to turn off your microphone and camera? Again, thank you. I'll open up to members for any questions for Bernard. Councillor Brown.
Yes, just one quick matter. I noticed that there's reference to flooding issues on page 52, and I know it's equally, it says that the flooding is satisfactory, if you like, the arrangements are put in place with SUDS and so forth. Can I ask, though, I mean, we're all conscious that there are increased flooding risks because of the changing weather phenomena. Is the department satisfied, if you like, that this is a kind of like high standard flooding arrangements that are put in place here that will be, to an extent, future proofed? I think it's an issue we have to keep in mind on these sort of issues.
Yes, just in terms of this development, this is for planning permission in principle, so the exact details of things like the house design, the finished floor levels, that hasn't been finalised, subject to it getting approval. And quite often, if you did require a flood risk assessment to be undertaken, there would be requirements, say, to have appropriate finished floor levels so that 1 in 100 year, 1 in 200 year flood event, so that they're not at risk. There's also different types of flooding that can apply, whether it's, from coastal, a river, or if it's runoff. So I don't think that there would be a solution here to ensure that there was nothing that was unacceptable.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. This planning application has a long history, and we may have thought everything would have been solved, but there are still critical questions that have to be asked. And I think it's 3 questions, if that is okay. In terms of 3.2, 6.3, which is the general planning setting, have to remember this is 36 houses, almost certainly upmarket houses, really put in the middle, practically the middle of the countryside. In terms of policies for net zero, which I think all parties support, there really does not seem to have been an assessment of how this will affect the move towards net zero, and indeed the policies for reducing overall road traffic. That's in question. In 4.3, the road traffic assessment, and while I realise it's been properly assessed in those terms, it seems to suggest there will be only 58 vehicle movements a day. I know the assessment is about the peaks. It just really doesn't seem to be a fair representation of the motor traffic that will be generated by these 36 houses, and I wonder if you could comment on that. 4.8 actually mentions that it will not be on a bus route. We should perhaps make a further comment on that, but the mention of buses really does appear to be that therefore it's not suitable for affordable housing. And what I take from this, not planning consideration, is that this is not a development for poor people. They can be put somewhere else. Without public transport, and although active travel is not a full substitute for public transport, again, has active travel as a proper assessment for active travel on the route between this development and the nearest shops and services. So that's 3 questions. Thanks.
Fraser, can I bring you in the roads question first of all, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Thank you. With regards to the trip generation for the site, we use an equation essentially to work out what the peak periods, the peak trip generation will be in the peak periods, and we're satisfied that's a robust assessment. It's based from a nationally recognised database called TRIX, which is they measure or survey developments where vehicles are going in and out, and they calculate the trip rate for that. The trip rate that we use is actually slightly more robust than that, and therefore for the peak periods, we're satisfied that it's a robust assessment. There will obviously be trips during the day, which haven't been mentioned in the report, but that's generally because at that time the road will be quieter. And so during the peak periods, when it's busiest, we're satisfied that with the additional passing places, the impact of the development will be mitigated.
Thank you. Bernard, can you pick up other points, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on reference to 4.8 of the report about the affordable housing aspect of the development. That's something that for any development we undertake consultation with colleagues in housing, and it depends on the nature and scale of the application. Some developments they would identify as being suitable to have an affordable housing provision on the site. Other sites, they'll make an assessment and advise us what they see as being more appropriate as a financial contribution. So in this instance, just because of some of the points that you've noted, just the location of the site, proximity from other settlements, etc., the feedback from Housing Services was that it would be a contribution as part of a legal agreement for this development, and that would be therefore thereafter spent once received on a location that was more appropriate for a housing catchment elsewhere. So that the actual development is not for affordable housing, but it is considered as part of the proposal. In terms of your previous point just about the move to net zero and active travel, this site was identified in the local plan, which was adopted last year. And obviously it goes through due process to get to that point in consideration. We are moving towards looking at having appropriate charging points just as one example of things, so that people can have electric vehicles. But there is always going to be a reliance in some of the more rural and remote areas that cars will be required to get people from A to B. There is a move to 20-minute neighbourhoods and having small areas where people can get, but there is an acceptance and acknowledgement that there will still be a need for people to use vehicular traffic, i.e. cars, to get from A to B and get around and do their day-to-day business. From a planning point of view, we are satisfied that this proposal accords with the local plan and that the site being identified as a suitable location for housing. And on that basis, we've agreed that, or we recommend approval of the proposal.
Thank you, Bernard. Just before I come to the members online, I'll take Councillor Allison in the room.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to just confirm that I fully agree with both my ward colleagues in their comments. There's a number of views I pick up from this, but there are questions throughout it as well. Not objecting to the principle of building, because as you've said, Bernard, that is within the local plan and within the curtilage, if you like, of the village that we have created. So we are not able to object on those grounds. Factually, in updated 3.32, you talk about another development in there. It's currently on hold because they cannot implement the conditions attached. Some of the conditions similar to the ones that we're putting in here. But the concerns we really have are to do with public safety. There is roughly, I think it's roughly a kilometre worth of Kerswell Avenue where people can be walking without a pavement, without lighting, very few passing places and certainly no refuge areas at this time. At the peak travel times, most of those will be in darkness for this in our area during the winter time. That has to indicate a safety issue. In the letter that the ward councillors received, there was an indication that if a planning application does not have full control over all the land they are applying for planning permission over, there is then safeguards asked for to ensure that they can implement the planning permission. Second question is, does that pass then also to any conditions that are attached? Because we have here conditions suggesting upgrading of passing places and providing refuge areas. None of the land that is part of this planning application is in the ownership of the applicant. So is it covered? Have they given you assurances that they can access that land to create and discharge the planning conditions? Within this as well, there is how the details of the maintenance of the road will take place. But that cannot take into account previous applications or the residents currently there. So how are they going to be, if you like, connected? Because it can't be up to one single development to carry these out. I was also disappointed in the report to hear that there had been no complaints to the planning department regarding Kerswell Avenue in particular. The three local councillors at the time had a meeting on that subject, not on this development as the report came back, but on the ensuring that the conditions previously had been adhered to. That letter also indicates that you are not now able to enforce some of those, and therefore you are changing the wording in this application. Just because you've changed the wording does not mean to say that you're addressing the issues. Sorry, there's quite a number of issues. 4.7, you're talking about the education. Yes, Carnwath does have plenty of capacity, but the nursery is currently being extended. Why isn't there a contribution to that? How are you going to assess the damage to the road just now and evaluate that and compare it to what other contractors are doing and the residents' liabilities as well? At 4, sorry, I haven't got the number, volume of traffic is already believed to be unacceptable by residents. So even if the increase isn't deemed unacceptable to the roads department, the current situation is. It also suggests at 4 that to upgrade the road would suburbanise the area. It's not roads that suburbanise an area, it's houses. So therefore I feel that that is not a competent statement either. It says that it's pragmatic, proportional and sympathetic. No, it's not. It's certainly not sympathetic to the current residents who have to put up with a lack of proper infrastructure for the village. What would happen if the current landowner refused to give land for these passing places? Shouldn't that be something, again, that is decided before we start rather than belatedly? The road capacity was not sufficient for officers before the very first application some 20 years ago, and that was overturned. It was not satisfactory when this area was up for planning and the first application that was granted detailed there had to be an adopted road put in to serve this settlement. Nothing has changed other than planners' views that suddenly a road that was unacceptable 20 years ago for fewer houses is now acceptable for a larger number. If your colleague was talking about the carbon efficiency, etc., no buses, etc. So therefore you're talking about people walking and cycling. Down Kerswell Avenue, no pavements, no lights. There is quite clearly a safety issue here and a poor junction at the end of it. So there's a couple of questions in there. Can have clarification on them, please, Bernard, and how you're going to address the differences in council officers' recommendations over the period.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harrison. I'll ask Monica just to come in first of all for a legal aspect, and then I'll bring in Rhodes and Bernard as well.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ellison, I think in terms of the questions you raised, the relevant one, I suppose from legal services point of view, was what happens if the current landowner refuses to allow the developer to make improvements to the road. And the way that the conditions are worded, they are pre-commencement conditions. Therefore, the planning, the houses would not be able to be built without the road being improved. So the planning consent would stay there. The land would have the benefit of the planning permission, but they would not be able to build it out because it's a pre-commencement condition, and therefore any development of that land would be illegal, and we would take enforcement action accordingly.
Councillor Ellison, you want to back on that point?
Sorry, for clarity then. If the landowner refuses to allow the developers to upgrade and increase the number of passing places and refuge areas, is there any way that he can be compelled to do that or not?
Unfortunately, not, Councillor. We can't compel them to. There may, however, be a desirability if there's more development in the area, but that would be a commercial transaction between the developers and the farm owner.
Thank you, Monica. Fraser, bring you in just to answer the kind of roads aspect, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of road safety on Kerswell Avenue, obviously the development's been up and running for a long time with, I think, around 80 houses there at the moment. There's not been any reported accidents on the road just now. I think the type of user of the road in terms of walking and cyclists, that will tend to be recreational, and certainly during the peak times I wouldn't anticipate there being many residents that would be walking, for example, to Carnwath, and we've undertaken an assessment of the additional passing places, which have to include a refuge area, so that if a car does pass at that point, then the pedestrians would have an area to stand off. I think the other point that was mentioned was the agreement of the dilapidation survey and the damage that could be caused by several, or I think that there will be 3 potentially different developments on Kerswell Avenue. This is an area that's obviously quite difficult to kind of completely make a black and white statement as to how that would, what the condition would be like at the time. So essentially a dilapidation survey is done. The nature of the road is recorded, usually with a on-site inspection and video, sort of footage of the defects. And then we need to obviously make a judgment as to the volume of traffic that would be used by each of the developer. And through that, there's usually a discussion with each of the developers around the sort of damage that they would have caused. And from that, there's an agreement over the repairs that need to be carried out. One of the items on
what's included as the condition is that would be undertaken every year, so that there would be a good opportunity to catch the damage and the defects throughout. And obviously there's another condition in there that is for the kind of upgrade of Kerswell Avenue. So in doing that, the damage to the road should be less, to a lesser extent. And I think that would address how the road is maintained during the construction period. I think I've answered the roads points.
So Alison, you quickly just want to come back on that.
Yeah, you've said that you would be looking to apportion basically the maintenance agreement between the different developers. Basically, that was one of the things that the councillors asked for at our meeting, and we were told the council could not do it. What has changed that you're now willing to apportion that maintenance programme when you wouldn't at the time of our meeting, and in terms of the response we got later?
The reference to the damages through the construction traffic, and so, for example, I don't recall saying that it couldn't be proportioned out to the different developers. It obviously depends on the type of and the status of the development at the time. There needs to be evidence of who's caused the damage and a judgment on that. I don't recall there being it couldn't be proportioned.
Do you want us to read out the letter that was sent to the ward councillors?
Councillor Alison, I'll take Monica first.
Thank you, Chair and Councillor Alison. My understanding of the discussion that we had in relation to the apportionment of maintenance was in relation to the existing position in the road. And Fraser's talking about, obviously, once development has commenced.
But the other areas are not going away. It has to be tied into that. Because if you're not going to apportion for the bits that have already started, for the residents that are there just now, how can you decide what the new development is going to do? It's one package. All of that needs to be brought together. And once again, you're saying you will apportion now, but you won't consider helping in the future, in the previous development areas.
Through you, Chair. As I said, my understanding of that was in relation to the title restrictions of the existing proprietors, and they had obligations in terms of that. And we had discussed at the meeting that the council obviously had no locus to intervene in that matter, not in relation to the matter Fraser's referring to now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Bernard, I'll let you answer the last, and then I'll take the members online.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things to pick up on, Councillor Alison. I know you'd mentioned nursery provision in Carnwath. In the report, it does refer to provision within the local area, so that could include in Carnwath. And just in terms of, where we are with the proposal, obviously there's a history to the site. There's a previous approval, and at that time, the road's position was they didn't require it to be upgraded to an adoptable standard. And from a planning perspective, we have to consult with our colleagues in road and to take on board their professional judgment and guidance. And that's what we do as part of the processing of this application. We've consulted them and, taken on board their advice, hence the conditions that are proposed. I've been out at the site myself and driven up Kerswell Avenue, and I know the issues that you're referring to and the areas of the road that are rutted and there's potholes on them, and the issues that there will be. We're trying to find a solution here that can not just allow planning permission to be granted, but taken on board some of the comments that have been raised in the past, and as you're well aware, the issues that have been ongoing. And you mentioned the maintenance. Yes, there hasn't been an issue in terms of enforcement where if it's put in someone's title deeds, as planners, we can't force someone to make sure that they pay a factor or that they undertake that. And the way it was worded in the previous sort of conditions and planning approvals, that once it went into the title deeds, that was almost the end of the matter, and people would have to seek independent arbitration if they wanted to resolve that. It's fairly common practice where there's either a private road or common areas that there would be a need for people to enter into some sort of factoring regime. More often than not, that's done through their title deeds. The condition that we've proposed, we feel, is more robust from a planning perspective, just by taking away that reference, and that may be of benefit going forward. What I would hope is that the result of that condition, yes, it just relates to the current development that we are talking about of the 36 house plots, but that may allow that development to have a factor, and it may allow it to be incorporated amongst the remainder of the development. We can't force the remaining people to enter into that agreement, but it's just trying to put forward a solution that may allow things to progress and improve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll take members online. Councillor Ross. John.
Thanks very much, Chair. Obviously, I wasn't party to this item when it came up in a previous planning committee. However, I'm quite alarmed today to hear the reports from local councillors as to the situation regarding the roads. It would appear to me that we definitely have a real problem there, one which has caused angst for some considerable time. And having some new developments in my own ward where builders under construction promise all sorts of things that they'll maintain and agree to, and then after we're up and running, we end up with all sorts of problems that local people have to try and manage. I'm certainly verging a wee bit towards the local members there and saying to myself, there's potential for lots more problems on this road with construction traffic than it first looks. I don't see why we can't do something more permanent about making sure that that road is brought under local authority control, and whatever we do in the meantime to make sure that that's brought into that situation, I think would be the way forward. And as I say, I'm certainly at this point in time verging towards supporting the local members in that area, because I know how bad these things can get once builders come on site, and then trying to get them to agree to things which they said they would do in the first place becomes a real problem and a nightmare for local residents. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Comments are noted as well. I'll move on to Councillor Mary Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to concur with the comments that Councillor Ross has just made. I've also been involved in the road up at Meeklernock and the residents, what they've had to face once the builders go on site. So I'm a bit alarmed on this paper coming forward before us today, and I would be looking for safe play areas for children. I'd be looking for upgrade of the road. So if it's within our gift, Chair, I would like to defer this paper till the questions that are all asked of the local members are dealt with, and then bring it back to another meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Comments are noted, and if you want to bring forward any amendments at the correct moment in time, then you're free to do so. I'll move on to Councillor Bert Thompson, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I can tie in. I know what Mary's saying there. For too long, I think infrastructure during planning, that's the time we should be seizing the opportunity to make sure things are implemented. Because I feel we let ourselves down a wee bit there. But the question I was asking, Chair, is regarding emergency services or other road users. Has MD, the planning could tell me, raised concerns about this road, and I'm mainly meaning MD for the emergency services, or has everything been okay so far? Just as a matter of interest. Thank you.
I'll ask Fraser to answer that question, Councillor Thompson.
Yes, so my knowledge of this one has been what's been said at the planning committee in terms of the issues around ongoing maintenance and not so much the road safety side of things.
Okay, that'll be fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ross Lambie.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a comment really that other local authorities in the UK, they employ what's called a construction traffic management plan, which is a document they have to submit when sites have difficult access or very close proximity to residents. And those documents, they control things like the size and frequency of vehicles, the idling time, whether they need banksmen during certain peak hours of the day, holding places for vehicles out with the site to then phone the manager to then be brought in when it's considered safe to do so, and contingencies to do with spillages of oil and fuel and things like that. I just wonder whether this was an application that was crying out for that kind of document to be submitted and approved by the Roads and Environmental Department as well as Planning. Thanks.
Thank you. Bernard?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that we do have conditions that pretty much cover all of those points that you've raised. So quite often with developments, we do get traffic management plans, and we, sometimes if, say, there was a school nearby, you would restrict the times that vehicle movements could be made or certain types of deliveries made to the site. So your points are noted, and yes, we've got conditions to cover those.
Councillor Lambie, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the difference is a CTMP that's submitted can be consulted upon and discussed with the neighbours, whereas the conditions sort of come along at the end of the discussion and they end up in meetings like this, whereas the CTMP brings it up at the beginning, which I think is a bit more valuable.
Yeah, again, it probably depends on the nature of the application. Because this is only for permission in principle, they won't have appointed any contractors. They don't know the exact type of houses that would be built, the size of trusses and the types of vehicles, etc. And also, it's a wee bit unusual that they're looking to do this as individual plots, perhaps, as opposed to one single developer. And there may be aspects of the development that they would maybe use joint contractors for, or it might be someone that is a self-builder. So there's different aspects there, but I think it's noted your comments about the different options available.
Thank you. Graham Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse the sore throat there. Also, I'm recovering from COVID. I wasn't planning to speak today, but obviously some of the contributions compelled me to come in and hopefully make a few salient points in relation to this planning application. The first point I want to raise in terms, again, a question for Bernard, is there's reference in 3.31 to planning permission CL/13/0488, February 2014 for 36 house plots. I'm assuming the 36 house plots application is almost identical to the one we have in front of us. Therefore, I don't want to use the P word precedent, but obviously that was decided back in February 2014 in relation to 36 house plots. the identical number to the one we have in front of us today. The other point I want to make, and maybe Bernard can amplify it a bit more, is, again, obviously I sat through the debate the last time it was deferred prior to the election. And Condition 30, the addition of Condition 30, I thought, and I understand the concerns of local members, I thought that the addition of Condition 30 would give, try to get it right, would give aid and comfort to the local members in terms of any burdens that could be applied to people, that Condition 30 would help them in terms of explaining to their constituents that this development could be better and be explained better in terms of an addition to many developments that are already off that Carswell Avenue. I mean, this is also, I actually feel sorry for the applicant here, is that listening to the local members, certainly Councillor McCallum and Councillor Allison, is that they're trying to visit maybe the omissions and the errors of previous applications on this one application, because it happens to be, no pun intended, further down the road, given from the other ones. So my view would be, if Bernard can ask about the previous application and the significance of Condition 30, because I think Condition 30 getting added in many ways helps me come to terms that I could support this. If Bernard could, thank you, Chair, if Bernard could explain that, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to confirm, Councillor Scott, that the consent approved in 2014 was largely the same site and same details as what we currently have before us. And that approval obviously impacted on the decision to include the site within the LDP as a housing site. In terms of the Condition 30 that you've mentioned, just to clarify, it's not a new condition. It was in the original report back in March. It's just that we've reworded it slightly. The previous condition that had tended to be used for developments in the Carswell estate had always made reference to the title deeds, and it was on review, we felt that it would be more robust to take that reference out, and it's more along the lines of the sort of maintenance condition that we would use on other sites. So we've just felt it was a bit more robust, and if there are potential issues, that it would make our jobs and planning a wee bit easier if we could take effective enforcement action if it was required.
Thank you, Bernard. Just before we tie this up, Councillor Donnelly, you made a proposal of deferral. Is that something you want to put forward, and do you have a seconder for the same?
I would second, if Mary, Chair, if Mary wants to put forward the deferral, I would second it.
Yep, I do want to put it forward. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Councillor Allison, and then I'll come to Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. I think I would like to go further and put an amendment for refusal. I need to make it clear that this is not in principle. It is quite clearly within the curtilage of the village and part of the local plan. What this would be down to entirely is to public safety, and I do not believe the conditions within this application attached to this application fully address these safety issues. As someone who has walked that road himself, most recently in April, beginning of May before the election, it's not just at peak times that you are meeting traffic on that road, also services businesses, and meeting some of those vehicles, you're going off the road onto muck. And until there is satisfactory access to that area, I think this needs to be refused on safety grounds.
Councillor Allison, have you got a seconder for your...
I'll second it.
Councillor Lambie, thank you. Bring in, in fact, Councillor Watson, I'll just bring in Monica first just to give some procedural, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the motions, Chair, you can... Sorry.
Sorry, thanks, Chair, through you. I just wanted to say to members, this application has been deferred once. And officers took cognizance of members' requests for deferral and the points that members wanted clarification of through that deferral. There are 40 conditions on the report, and by my arithmetic, there's 11 of those are related to roads and transportation and parking issues, including, as has been explained by Bernard and raised by Councillor Scott, a more robustly worded condition 30 about the maintenance of the road. I'm at a loss, so if obviously it's entirely up to the committee what you want to do with the report, but I think if you were to choose to defer it again, you would have to be very, very clear in your reasons for the deferral and what do you think continues to be lacking in the report. That means you can't make a decision today. Obviously, the applicant is entitled to a decision now. It's been going on for some length of time. So it may be that it would be better if you really feel you can't support the application to move a refusal. But in moving the refusal, members, I would ask you to find a robust and competent planning reason for your refusal, given the very onerous conditions that are part of the report and the fact that the Roads Authority is content to recommend approval. The site is in the local plan, and thinking ahead about what may happen in any appeal scenario. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just before I come to Councillor Watson, just Councillor Donnelly, if you would like to just have a think about what that deferral actually means, and I'll come back to you just in a moment. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. This is a substantial development in a rural community, and quite honest, I'm quite alarmed in what I'm hearing today about the access road. And I think if developers want to develop in these areas, they should be taking responsibility for the whole development and the access road, and making that to a standard that can be adopted by the local authority. I think I hear comment about, you know, that the enforcement action could be taken further down the line, and all I would say would be good luck with that, because any time that I've tried to get enforcement action against developers, there's always a reason why really we can't do it, or whatever, or there's delays in doing it. So I've got real concerns, and I think that is a legitimate argument for refusal, that we as members are not satisfied with what we're hearing today about the safety and the access of the site. I think regarding Councillor Donnelly's wanting to defer it, and I think as rightly said, it's been deferred before, and at times you've just got to take a decision, and I think we should be heading to a decision today and not deferring it one way or another. So I'm not convinced that with what I've heard that we have got a sound site with sound access and safe access, and that's how I'll be voting on that basis. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Councillor Donnelly, just before we move to the motion, you moved for referral, seconded by Councillor Ross, and you obviously heard from Pauline as well. Can I just clarify what grounds for that deferral that you're looking to put forward?
Well, I'm taking into consideration the 45 objections that's on this application. I don't think the community has been listened to. I think the councillors in the area haven't really, their views have not been taken on board. I hear Pauline, and with respect, Pauline, it shouldn't matter how many times an application gets deferred. If it's not right, it's not right. I thought I was being... can I have an objection to Graham Scott's cases that he's pulling? I've got a legitimate point to make here, Graham, as you do, and I'm going to make it, okay?
I'm actually sneezing and coughing. That's not making a face.
Excuse me. Thanks, Councillor Scott. Councillor Donnelly, can you finish your point, please, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
So I think there is serious objections. I am listening to Councillor Allison and where he wants to go, but I thought with the comments he first made that a deferral was appropriate to take on board the community and the councillors to relook at it and then bring it back.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. I'm just struggling to understand a deferral at this point because we've already deferred it already, so I don't see what the basis of trying to bring that back, but that's up to the members and it's been seconded, so I'll take that. But just before we do that, I'll bring Monica back in.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a couple of comments in terms of both the motion and the amendment that have been proposed. In relation to the motion for deferral, I would just highlight that the local opposition to a development is not a material consideration in planning matters. And the test that the committee has to apply its mind to today is whether the application accords with the development plan or there are any material considerations that otherwise merit grant. A level of local opposition is not a material consideration. Neither is ownership issues or the lack of a reasonable prospect of the development proceeding. Case law has provided that those are not material considerations that the planning authority can give any weight to. And in terms of road safety grounds, the current position from our roads officers is that there are no issues in terms of road safety. So in terms of the information before you, the road safety officers' evidence does not support such a reason for refusal. Now, in terms of the next step, if we were to refuse the application today, or even defer, the applicant has the right to appeal. That appeal would go to the Scottish Ministers. In terms of the expenses of an appeal, expenses are awarded on the basis of unreasonable behaviour on the part of the planning authority. Making a decision which does not have not based on reasonable planning grounds is a ground for having expenses awarded against the planning authority in terms of unreasonable behaviour. Therefore, I need to bring that to the attention of the committee to see if that is due to the fact that that's the motion that's before us today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Monica. I've got a couple of members online, and then I'm going to, in fact, I'm just going to move the motion as is before I come to the members. So I'll move the motion.
I'll second it.
And I'll bring in Councillor McLaughlin first, and then we'll move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. This has obviously had a lot of discussion, and there's obviously very strong feelings among the local community. In particular, local members are voicing that on their behalf, and that's laudable. But I'm concerned about it's already been deferred, and the point that Councillor Donnelly makes about deferring it again. I hear what Pauline's saying, and I hear what Monica's saying. I also am interested to hear what David Watson was saying about trying to use enforcement powers to enforce conditions that have been agreed upon when the developer doesn't stick to those conditions. Is the way forward here, Chair, and hopefully be guided by Pauline and Monica, if we impose a condition that the road has to be upgraded to a particular standard, can we insist that that is done prior to any building works taking place? I mean, this is a considerable development. It has been mentioned. I think it was Ralph that had mentioned it about the types of houses that's likely to be built here. There's probably quite a lot of money to be made from this site, and I think it's only fair that the developer makes a contribution to making sure that it's acceptable. And if that means building a road prior to that to make it to a standard that members, in particular local members and the community, are happy with, then is that a way forward? If that is the case, I would like to move that, if that's something that I can do, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I'll just come back in because I am aware that that's a private road, but I'll bring Pauline or Monica. Monica, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McLaughlin, is this condition 30 that you're referring to, that is prior to the commencement of work on site, written details of a scheme for the future maintenance of Carswell Avenue, including associated verge, placing bases and traffic calming, shall be submitted to the written approval of the planning authority, and the submitted scheme shall include a maintenance and management schedule and shall be implemented prior to the occupation of any dwelling within the development. Thereafter, Carswell Avenue shall be maintained in accordance with the approved details at all time.
If that's, I hadn't actually had all that detail in my mind, Pauline, but Monica, but obviously you have. If that is, I mean, the point is to be a private road, but if it's a private road, is it going to be adopted at some point? Is that the likely outcome of this? If the plan application goes ahead, would the road likely be adopted if it was brought up to that standard?
I think that might be something that's better for Fraser to answer. I'll just pass over to him.
The upgrade works that are proposed simply they wouldn't be to an adoptable standard where you would.
Sorry, Chair, I can't really hear Fraser very well.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
It's very quiet, Fraser. Maybe bring the mic a bit forward.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
That's better, yeah.
The upgrade works that would be proposed wouldn't be to an adoptable standard.
See.
And therefore we wouldn't be looking to adopt it after those works.
Right, okay, that puts that one in the head then. So, Chair, thanks, Fraser, for that clarification, and Monica. So I'll withdraw from that proposed motion that I was going to make. Obviously, I can't make that because if we can't enforce that, if we can't impose that prior to that, any work's being done because it's a private road. I'm appealing here now to Bernard and Pauline. Is there something else, or even Monica, is there something else at our disposal that we can give some guarantees to this community? Because I'm mindful of the fact that what Monica has just said, if we refuse this application, bearing in mind, and this is for members, bearing in mind that the recommendation from our own officials is to approve. Now, if this application is refused and they go to appeal, it's almost certain that they're going to win that appeal, and then we're going to be left with the cost. So I think it's better to find a way forward just now, rather than refusing then having to agree to accept it later with additional costs. Pauline, Monica, Bernard.
Pauline, come in first.
Thanks, Councillor McLaughlin. I do agree with your comments about a prospective appeal, but yeah, I mean, as Bernard outlined in his presentation to members of the report, the reason for the rewording and the tightening up of condition 30 about the road scheme is so that we can take enforcement against the developer. So, we did take cognizance of the views expressed by members at the previous committee before the election. We did take cognizance of the comments of the local members representing their constituents, and that's why we've presented that condition in that way, because as Bernard explained, it does make it more enforceable in planning terms. So that hopefully give you some comfort, Councillor McLaughlin. Yes, if the developer doesn't do what he's supposed to do, we can take enforcement action against him for the part of the road appertaining to these 36 houses. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, if I may come back to Pauline, I respect your position as head of planning, but and getting back to the comments that Councillor Watson had made, due to recent discussions that we've had, Pauline, I don't have entire faith in enforcement action after the event. Sometimes it's easy in paper, but it's not always easy just to put it into practice after the event and after the horse is bolted, for wanting a better expression. But anyway, Chair, I'm happy to withdraw from making a motion with that prior condition because it doesn't seem it's going to work.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I'll bring in Councillor Donnelly because I see there's something in the chat. Just Councillor Donnelly.
Yes, Chair. I would like to withdraw my deferral in favour of refusal if my seconder is in agreement with that.
Thank you, Mary. John?
Yes, Chair. I was hoping the very same as Councillor McLaughlin that the whole idea of this deference was to try and find some way through because like Councillor Watson and Councillor McLachlan, trying to get enforcement action after the fact regarding developers is really difficult, and I was hoping that we could look at trying to do something there. But quite honestly, if that's not the route that we're going to take, then I know which way I'm going to move. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Bring Councillor Devlin in, and then we are going to move to the vote.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask one question. If this is refused and it goes to the reporter, can the reporter then just impose their own conditions and withdraw the conditions that we've got on that? Can somebody clarify that for me, please?
Yes, the reporter becomes a planning authority, so the reporter can decide on any conditions that they want to impose. Yeah.
I'll let you in, Councillor Watson, then I'll move.
Sorry, Chair. I think I hate it when this goes down this way. We're here as councillors to take decisions based on what we hear and what we see and what we know. Whether that agrees with officers or not, we should be taking these decisions on the basis of what we're hearing, what we're seeing and what we know. And to blind it by just saying, well, officers have agreed it and we might lose it at appeal. Well, if we lose it at appeal, that's unfortunate. But we've taken the decision to the best of our abilities based on the knowledge that we've got. And I think I would hope every councillor would base it on that way. And taking your point there about, if there are conditions that a reporter brings in, well, that'd be it. But we've not done our job here today if we don't take a decision based on what we know and what we're hearing. So I would urge all councillors to do it on that basis. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move to the vote. I'll pass over to Stuart.
Excuse me, I have my hand raised here. I can make a comment. Hello?
Councillor Salamati, I'll let you come in and then we are moving to the vote. I'm not taking any more after yourself.
Thank you very much. My understanding is if the planning permission is given and the construction went ahead before it can be occupied or become sold, or they need the completion certificate. And if the only reason they can't get completion certificate is that they have complied with all the conditions. If they cannot comply with the conditions, their insurance would be, the void or, affected. There's so many kind of, in construction business, they can lose out that they have to come to do it. And plus, I understand there is a private road and there's not, the concern on that. But in terms of, our power, in the planning department, is it possible, to control it through the completion certificate? If we can, the polling can, advise on that, please.
I'll ask Bernard to respond to you, Councillor.
Councillor, just to confirm that the issuing of a completion certificate is under the building regulations and the issuing of planning permission is under the planning legislation. So the two are separate. And we wouldn't be able to withhold the issuing of a completion certificate or a habitation certificate due to a separate planning issue. So that it wouldn't be appropriate to do that.
Thank you, Bernard. I'll ask Stuart to take us to the vote.
Thanks, Chair. Just before I do so, Councillor Allison, can I just clarify? Can people hear me okay?
Yep.
You're moving to refuse planning permission on the grounds of road safety? Correct. Okay. So the motion is planning permission is granted subject to conditions attached, which has been proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery. The amendment is refuse planning permission on the grounds of road safety, and that has been proposed by Councillor Allison and seconded by Councillor Lambie. So if you could please state your voting intention. Councillor Allison. Councillor Barker. Can I just remind members to switch their microphones on before they indicate? So Councillor Allison and Councillor Barker have both indicated amendment. Councillor Robert Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Buchanan.
Amendment.
Councillor Clark.
Motion.
Councillor Convery.
Motion.
Councillor Cowie.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Motion.
Councillor Donnelly.
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson Miller.
Amendment.
Councillor Frame.
Amendment.
Councillor Fulton.
Motion.
Councillor Handybod. Councillor Horsham.
Amendment.
Councillor Lambie.
Amendment.
Councillor MacDonald.
Amendment.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Ross.
Amendment.
Councillor Salamati.
Amendment.
Councillor Scott.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Toner.
Amendment.
Councillor Watson.
Amendment.
Fourteen members voted in favour of the amendment and 10 members have voted in favour of the motion. Therefore, declare the amendment carried. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Move on to agenda item 5, application P220148, pages 75 to 86 within your pack. That's a detailed planning application for Scott Holmes, and I'll ask Jane to present the agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned, this application seeks the erection of 15 dwelling houses at the site of the former Laburnum House off Laburnum Avenue at Green Hills in the East Kilbride settlement. The site is currently vacant rough grassland bound by residential properties to the north and a care home facility to the south within the established residential area. The application seeks to erect 12 semi-detached units and 3 detached units laid out in a linear street pattern built into the slope of the site and comprises of a mix of 3 and 4 bed house types across 3 different designs. This is an updated house type design based upon a previous approval which was granted for 15 units on the site back in 2007 but was never implemented. Access to the site would be from Walnuts Grove with parking for each house provided. It's considered that this house type is appropriate as it fits within the surrounding area and the development would raise no adverse amenity impacts and the site is considered to be well connected with access to local services within close proximity. The site technically can be adequately accessed and serviced and landscaping details are sought by way of condition. No public comments were received on the application and no objections were raised by consultees. And the small-scale nature of the development does not engage any developer contributions. Overall, the development is considered to be an appropriate residential infill site within the established urban settlement where residential development can be supported, complying with the Council's spatial strategy within the local development plan. It is appropriately laid out, sited and designed, and provides a suitable housing mix in accordance with the relevant policies outlined in the report. As such, the application is recommended for approval for the reason outlined at paragraph 7.1, subject to the conditions noted on page 83 of the papers. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Has any members got any questions? Nope. Happy to accept the paper. I'll move the paper.
I'll second it.
The otherwise minded? Thank you. Agreed.
Yep.
Agenda item 6, application P220089, pages 87 to 100, 57 Royal Gardens in Bothwell, and I'll ask Bernard to present.
Thank you, Chair. Just to update the committee, following the report being published, two of the original objectors have made comment about the content of the report. They haven't raised any new issues and maintained their objection. One objector did indicate that they would have liked to address the committee. However, had a request for a hearing been made in time, it would not have met the criteria and therefore is unlikely to have been permitted. Obviously, as everyone is aware, the meeting is available to view online and the recording will also be made available. And it was also requested that the application be deferred, but as I said, there's been no issues raised. The application relates to a two-storey front extension at 57 Royal Gardens, Bothwell. It's located within an existing residential area of large detached villas. The topography of the site is relatively flat and the application site is a corner plot and therefore open to the street both along its north and west boundaries. Permission is sought for the erection of a two-storey extension to an existing attached garage. This would form an enlarged garage at ground floor level with habitable rooms above. The proposed extension would project 4 metres on the ground beyond the existing boundaries and it would be 6 metres in depth. On the upper floor, the extension will cover the footprint of the extended garage below. We'll have a hipped roof measuring approximately 5 metres in height to its eaves and 8 metres to its apex, and it will feature roof lights on the east-facing roof pitch. There's adequate driveway parking to accommodate 4 or more cars, and obviously the triple garage would provide additional parking. In terms of the local plan, there's no issues raised. It's within a general urban area and it just comes down to an assessment of the proposal. The consultations, there's no issues raised from roads and the representations are summarised in section 5 of the report and the detailed responses from the officers. In terms of the proposal, it's a slightly unusual in that it is both two-storey and to the front of the proposal. However, the development of residential houses round about it is characterised by a lot of them having attached garages which have accommodation above. In this particular instance, there are 2 properties in close proximity which are both sort of L-shaped properties and have very similar type garage accommodation with accommodation above. I would draw your attention that the property opposite did get planning permission for a garage with accommodation above, albeit it's not quite two-storey, but it does have rooftop or attic accommodation, and it's fairly similar and in similar relationship to the public road and footpath as the current proposal. From a planning point of view, it's considered that the property has sufficient garden grounds to accommodate it. The design is considered to be acceptable. Materials will reflect the existing property. Adequate parking can be provided. We did a shadow analysis which did not identify any unacceptable impacts on the surrounding properties and we're of the view that there's no unacceptable overlooking or privacy issues. Overall, we are considering that the application complies with relevant policies in the local plan and recommending approval of the application.
Thank you, Bernard. I'll open up to the members. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Devlin.
Hi, Chair. I recognise that this is probably just your normal, what we'd class a normal planning application, but there seems to be quite a concerns among the local community, and I was wondering, would it be at all possible if we deferred this just now so that we can address the issues? It's as much to do with the timings when the notifications come out and some of the technical stuff that appears to be in some of the objectors' letters that have came to us. Thanks.
Thank you. Maureen, have you got a seconder?
Don't know if somebody's prepared to do it. If not, that's...
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thanks.
I will move the paper as is. I'll second it, Chair. I'll ask Stuart to take us to the vote.
Sorry, Councillor Devlin, can I just clarify the grounds for the deferral, please?
It's as much, Stuart, the timing that the notifications come out and some of the technical information that has been passed. I'm not technical, so I really, that's how I can't make the decision because I'm not an engineer or a planner. So it's just so if there's a chance that the objectors can sit and put their issues and concerns to the planners. I'm not asking for it to be refused. It's literally just to be deferred. Thanks.
Okay, so the motion to grant planning permission subject to conditions has been proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery. And the proposal to defer the application for further consideration to allow objectors further opportunity to liaise with Planning Department has been proposed by Councillor Devlin and seconded by Councillor Scott. So again, if councillors could please indicate your voting preference. Councillor Allison.
Motion.
Councillor Barker.
The motion.
Councillor Brown.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan.
Defer.
Councillor Clark.
Motion.
Councillor Convery.
Motion.
Councillor Cowie.
Amendment.
Councillor Devlin.
Defer.
Councillor Donnelly.
Defer.
Councillor Ferguson Miller.
Defer.
Councillor Frame.
Defer.
Councillor Fulton.
Motion.
Councillor Handybod. Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Lambie.
Motion.
Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Salamati.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment to defer.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Toner.
Motion.
Councillor Watson.
Motion.
Okay, we have 7 members voted in favour of the amendment and 17 members have voted in favour of the motion. I therefore declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Councillor Allison.
Point of order. Stuart, did I pick you up correctly? Who seconded the amendment? Was it not Councillor Scott? I thought you said Convery, but sorry if I picked you up wrong.
Scott. Councillor Scott.
Okay.
Thank you, members. We've been going some time, so it's my gift to give us 5-minute comfort break if we can. In fact, we'll give you 10 minutes. We'll be back here for 11:45. The Planning Committee meeting. I'm going to ask Stuart just to run through the SIDM again, so please just bear with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask members to please indicate their attendance. Councillor Allison. Here. Councillor Barker.
Present.
Councillor Buchanan.
Here.
Councillor Clark.
Here.
Councillor Convery.
Here.
Councillor Cowie.
Here.
Councillor Devlin. Councillor Donnelly.
Here.
Apologies from Councillor Fagan. Councillor Ferguson Miller.
Here.
Councillor Frame. Councillor Fulton.
Here.
Councillor Handybod. Councillor Horsram.
I'm here.
Councillor Lambie.
Here.
Apologies from Councillor McAdams. Councillor Thompson still present.
Here.
Councillor MacDonald.
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Here.
Councillor Nelson's present. Apologies from Councillor Ray. Councillor Brown, you still present?
Yes, present.
Councillor Ross.
Yes, here.
Councillor Salamati. Councillor Scott.
Here.
Councillor Toner. Councillor Watson.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner, thanks.
Agenda item 7, application P220108, pages 101 to 110 in your pack. Erection of first floor extension to detached garage, 7 Mance Avenue in Bothwell. And I'll pass over to Bernard for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for the erection of a first floor extension to a detached garage without increasing the footprint of the property at 7 Mance Avenue, Bothwell. The site is within the conservation area where the immediate surroundings are characterised by large traditional villas with spacious garden grounds. The proposed extension will increase the height of the walls, remove the roof, and overall it will result in the pitch of the roof being increased to its maximum point by approximately a metre. The roof will then be finished in natural slate with the external walls finished in off-white render to match a previous extension that's been added to the existing dwelling. The existing garage is off-white in colour at the moment and therefore is designed to match it. The extension is proposed on the upper floor for use as a home office and gym, and there was a larger window proposed on the front elevation. Following discussions and to reduce any prospects of any overlooking issues, this was reduced in size. There was also a shadow analysis undertaken, which didn't raise any issues. In terms of the local plan, the proposal is considered to comply with the relevant policies. There were 6 letters of objection, and the issues raised are summarised in section 5 of the report. Following an assessment of the proposal, it's considered that in terms of scale, design and materials, the proposed extension will be sympathetic to the character and setting of the existing garage and its surroundings. It won't be overbearing and it won't result in any unacceptable overlooking or overshadowing. Overall, it's considered that the proposal is acceptable and it's recommended that the application is approved.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions from members? No, happy to approve the recommendations. I'll move that.
Second.
Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 8, application P220246, pages 111 to 120, 19 Fergus Gardens, Hamilton, and I'll ask Bernard to present the paper.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is for planning permission for the demolition of a garage and the erection of a single-storey extension on the side elevation, demolition of a rear conservatory and replacement with a single-storey extension, also adding rear decking and other alterations including the removal of a chimney and replacement of render to the property. The property is a semi-detached single-storey dwelling house located at 19 Fergus Gardens, Hamilton, in a suburban area characterised by houses of similar scale and design. There are some steep level changes in the vicinity, and the garden at the rear of the property slopes away from the house and is at a lower level. The proposed side extension will have a 43 square metres roughly rectangular footprint projecting between 4 and 5 metres from the existing side elevation. It would have a gable roof as a continuation of the existing, and it would be finished in materials to match the existing property. The proposed rear extension would replace the existing conservatory and would have a low-pitched roof that's similar to the height of the existing conservatory that was there, and it would raise slightly above the existing wall head, but it will be finished sympathetically and won't raise any issues in terms of its appearance. There's also an area of rear decking which will be raised above ground level to approximately 0.5 metres. It had been larger in the initial proposals, but following discussions with the applicant we got that to be reduced to ensure that there would be no unacceptable overlooking of neighbouring properties. The proposal is within a general urban area and there's no policy issues raised. The representations are summarised in section 5 of the report. Overall, the location, design, scale of the proposed extensions and decking are considered to be acceptable, and it's recommended that the application is approved.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions from members? Not happy to move the report. I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Everyone agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 9 is the South Lanarkshire Development Plan Scheme 2022, pages 121 to 138. Sorry, Tony Finn is going to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks committee approval for the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan Scheme for 2022. Just by way of background, the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997 requires planning authorities in Scotland to prepare a development plan scheme. The scheme is to set out the authority's programme for preparing and reviewing their local development plan and what is likely to be involved at each stage, and the scheme is to be updated annually. Until recently, the development plan comprised the Strategic Development Plan, the STP, and the Local Development Plan, LDP. The STP for Glasgow and the Clyde Valley is known as Clyde Plan and is progressed by a joint committee that includes South Lanarkshire Council. The current SDP2 was approved in March 2017. The LDP is prepared by individual planning authorities such as South Lanarkshire and sets out detailed policies and proposals for their particular area to guide the use of lands and buildings. The second South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan, LDP2, was adopted on the 9th of April 2021. Since then, the Planning Scotland Act 2019 has received royal assent, and its provisions are being incorporated into the 1997 Act that I mentioned. Among other things, it introduces changes to the development plan system. This includes the repeal of strategic development plans and their replacement by non-statutory regional spatial strategies. So they will be part of the development plan as we take things forward. Combining the existing National Planning Framework and Scottish Planning Policy into one document, which will be called National Planning Framework 4, and that in turn will become part of the development plan. The need to replace LDPs at least every 10 years, as opposed to 5 years at the moment. The repeal of the ability of councils to prepare supplementary guidance. And finally, the Act will also allow local communities to prepare local place plans for their local area. That's to enable greater public involvement in the planning of places. An LPP, though, must accord with the LDP in place at the time. So a development plan scheme for South Lanarkshire for 2022 has been prepared, and it's attached as an appendix to the report. The scheme highlights that the development plan process at the moment is in a period of transition, as the detailed requirements of the 2019 Act are brought forward by the Scottish Government. In terms of NPF4, the Scottish Government recently published a consultation document. In addition, consultation on draft secondary legislation and guidance on the preparation of a new style local development plan was published earlier this year. The Planning Committee agreed the Council's response at its meeting on the 29th of March, just before the elections, and they were subsequently submitted to the Scottish Government. It's currently anticipated the approved NPF4 will be published after the summer of 22, and the finalised regulations and guides for LDP preparation later this year. Thereafter, the relevant parts of the Act and the approved secondary legislation will take effect. It's at this point the Council can formally begin preparation of its third local development plan. The development plan scheme includes an initial programme for each stage of the process. However, this cannot be prepared in any great detail at the moment until NPF4 and the second legislation is approved. So an updated programme will be included in the DPS for next year. A participation statement will also be developed in next year's version. And it should be highlighted that engagement and consultation with local communities and stakeholders will be much wider and more intensive than previously. It should also be noted that transitional arrangements published by the government last year highlights the expectation that the new form of LDP will be adopted by all councils by 2027. The recommendation, therefore, Chair, is to approve the development plan scheme attached as an appendix to the report and thereafter be made available on the council website and also submitted to the Scottish Ministers.
Thank you very much. Tony, any questions from members? Councillor Allison?
Yeah, Tony, just a bit of clarification. I get it. The regional strategy plans, most of it. The way they're mentioned in here, they're obviously broader than council-wide. Yet the difference between in our own council, between East Kilbride, Hamilton and Clydesdale, is quite significant in what will be required. Will it be possible then to basically split Strathclyde, South Lanarkshire into different strategy groups to take account of the different areas?
Yeah, just answer your first part of your question, Councillor Allison. So the regional, strategic development plan, as now, or the regional space strategy to come, that's prepared by Clyde Plan on behalf of the 8 authorities in the Glasgow and Clyde Valley area. In terms of when we come to next LDP, split it between, I think what you're saying is split it between rural and urban areas. I don't actually know if that's possible or not. I'd need to go and check the regulations to see if that's capable of doing that or not. I say if traditionally the LDP would cover the whole of the council area, so I think probably not. But I'll go away and check that for you and come back to you if that's okay. But I suspect probably not.
Thank you. A couple of members on Teams. Councillor Mary Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. I would just welcome this report. And I know with tenants and residents in my ward, there's two coming forward for the LNR, and that's Neilsland and Ernock and Udston and Glenlee Woods. Tony, just a wee question. We have friends of Glenlee Woods. Going forward, would community groups like Friends of Glenlee Woods, and if there's a community group in Neilsland and Ernock, would they be able to be involved?
Councillor Donnelly, sorry just to interrupt. That's the next item. We're still on agenda item 9. Sorry. I'll leave your question for the nature reserve in the next one. Sorry.
Right,
you're just a wee bit step too quick.
Step too quick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bert Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. Tony there alluded to consultation and wider consultation. Now, I find that sometimes we've got groups, the same people sit in all these groups. How can we get more diversity and more young people involved and get it out there to the public? So I think it's very important, as I'm sure colleagues will agree, that we get the views of everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Interestingly, Councillor Thompson, the 2019 Act does make provision that children and young people are specifically mentioned to be consulted and engaged in the local development plan process. I know that the Scottish Government's going to be publishing draft guidance later this year on that very subject, so it'll be interesting to see what that says. But yes, children and young people are very much at the forefront of the process going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members. I'm going to move that recommendation.
Second it.
Members agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 10, South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, supporting planning guidance for local nature reserves, pages 139 to 162. Again, I'll ask Tony to present this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report seeks approval for the supporting planning guidance on local nature reserves. Just by way of background, the Planning Committee on the 1st of December 2020 agreed to carry out the necessary steps to adopt Local Development Plan 2. And the plan was subsequently adopted in April 2021. Following adoption of the plan, the Council has begun preparation of a series of supporting guidance to support the plan, and we have brought several of those to committee for approval. This form of guidance doesn't form part of the development plan as such. However, approval by the Council gives it a formal status, meaning that it will be a material consideration in decision making. Supporting planning guidance also supports the policies in the local development plan, and it's intended to provide guidance to developers at an early stage so they'll be able to factor those into the proposals. So the reasons for coming forward with this SPG, so during the preparation of LDP2, the provision of 16 new local nature reserves at the locations listed in 4.1 of the report were proposed, together with an extension to the existing Langlands Moss local nature reserve. Now, at that time, precise boundaries for each of the local nature reserves couldn't be established. So as a result, indicative boundaries were shown as proposals on the relevant settlement plans in the proposed plan that was published for public consultation. In accordance with statutory requirements, a range of publicity consultation was carried out at that time, including all addresses which neighbour the sites, including the local nature reserves, being notified directly. As a result of that, representations were received, and a number of minor changes were made to the LNR boundaries. These changes were considered by the reporter who carried out the formal examination of the proposed plan, and he didn't make a recommendation requiring any further changes to those boundaries. Nevertheless, a number of land ownership issues were still being resolved when the plan was adopted by the Council in 2021. The detailed boundaries, therefore, were not shown on the settlement plans at that stage, but instead the locations were shown indicatively with symbols. To address this matter, paragraph 6.2 of the local development plan states that the detailed boundaries of the LNRs will be defined through the preparation of management plans for these areas and included in supporting planning guidance. So that's why we're coming forward with this today. In parallel with the local development plan process, colleagues in Countryside and Green Space have been in detailed discussions with NatureScot to progress the formal declaration of the LNRs. NatureScot endorsed the declaration of the LNRs in 2021, and a report seeking approval to proceed with the declaration was approved by the Planning Committee on the 5th of October 2021. This report contained the detailed boundaries of the LNRs for committee approval, and the formal declaration has been progressed by the Head of Administration and Legal Services earlier this year. Draft management statements, which include information about all the sites and give an update of the work done to date, community involvement and plans for the future, are being prepared for each of the LNRs, and they're available on the Council's website. So the next step then, so in terms of if committee agreed to approve this supporting planning guidance today, as I said before, the whole process has been subject to previous consultation. The SPG doesn't introduce any new policy or set out any detailed requirements for developers. They have previously been subject, as I said, to consultation through the LDP process, and also the draft management statements that were prepared also. So as a result, we don't believe there's a need for any further consultation on the SPG, as we have done in previous cases, as its purpose is to consolidate the existing LNR boundary maps into one easy-to-use spot planning guidance document. So in view of that, it's recommended that the SPG, as proposed and as set out in the appendix, is approved. And if that's agreed, the document will be published on the Council's website and therefore thereafter used in decision-making on planning applications.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions from members? Councillor John Ross. You're on mute, John.
Sorry, Chair. Always somebody does it. Can I ask Mary to come in first, and I'll come in after, if that's okay?
Councillor Donnelly, you didn't have your hand back up, but I'm happy for you to come in if you want.
Sorry, Chair. It was just to mute what I had said earlier, but I came in too soon, and that was to welcome the plans, but also to ask Tony if the communities are going to get involved in the nature trails, because I know within, you've got two highlighted in my ward, Neilsland and Ernock, and the Udston and Glenlee Woods, and I know there's friends of Glenlee Woods there. So it was just to ask, going forward, would we be approaching community groups to be involved in the nature trails? Thank you, Tony.
Yep, through you, Chair. Yes, community groups have been involved in preparing the draft management plans to date, and Countryside and Green Space colleagues who are going to be involved in taking those plans forward are very active in engaging with local groups such as the ones you mentioned in your ward. So the answer is yes, Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Tony. John?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Obviously, like my colleague, I really welcome this. You know, we're so lucky in South Lanarkshire having so many areas because of our geographical situation, and we're actually vital to the Glasgow City region for the number of areas that we can contribute environmental eco systems. So, you know, from my point of view, I consider myself very lucky to be living in South Lanarkshire and be able to afford the opportunity to so many of our residents to share in the nature parts that we have here. And I'm very happy to do anything we can to help sustain that going forward. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. Bert, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll make this very quick. I think it's been covered there. I welcome this. It's very current in my area, and we happen to have a lot of good groups here that support it and are already been award-winning groups. So if we move this forward as quickly as possible, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Fulton.
Yeah, very much on the same vein. Welcome this report, and it's good to see that there's been a nature reserve earmarked for Campus Lang East area, which is more than welcome after a few years of increasing residential development in the area. It's good to see this on the paper, and I very much welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fulton. Councillor Cowie.
Thanks, Chair. I just wish to say I welcome this report as well. I've got one of the nature reserves in my ward, Bernbury Meadows. I just want to highlight again, it's a fabulous place. We've got 70 allotments, but total lack of parking spaces, which is impacting on all the local streets. I just wanted to highlight it, but it's a fabulous place and I welcome the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. Councillor Salamati.
Yeah, similar to my colleagues, I would just welcome this report, and happy to see that, you know, 2 out of the 3 East Kilbride Nature Reserve suggestions are in my ward, and very pleased to, you know, they support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Happy with the recommendations. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Everybody agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I don't have any items of urgent business, but just before we finish off today's meeting, I'd just like to thank Pauline Elliott. This is our last committee meeting today. Pauline is taking part retirement, I think. So I'd just like to thank, I've obviously not worked with you for too long as chair of the committee, but I would just like to thank you, Pauline, for your commitment, your dedication and your hard work to this committee and to the planning department and a whole. And I wish you well in your retirement, or part retirement, should we say, and please take care. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.